Yeah, welcome all of you to this seminar by Professor Manthiram. He is one of the distinguished persons who is working in the field of lithium-ion batteries. So the title of his talk is today is the Sustainable Battery Chemistries for Electrical Energy Storage. And currently he's a Regents Chair in engineering at UT Austin and also the director of the Texas Materials Institute. If you look at his bio, you will run out of breath looking at his awards and also at the number of affiliations and his distinguished career. So I'll let you read it. But just to summarize, he has an H index of 139 and 80,000 citations, which is amazing. And one of his greatest, I believe, in my opinion, would be achievements would be that he also delivered the 2019 Chemistry Nobel Prize lecture in Stockholm on the behalf of Professor John Goodenough. So we are really lucky to have him here. I'm very happy to have him here, and I'm looking forward to his seminar. Yeah, the floor is all yours, Professor Manthiram.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. So this is a warm-up slide. So as we move forward, we use more and more energy, and that is largely based on fossil fuel. That has two problems. One is a finite supply of fossil fuel, and it creates a lot of air pollution. So what is the solution? The solution is renewable energy, but renewable energy is intermittent, like solar and wind. Daytime we get solar light, nighttime we don't. It wants to come and it wants to come. Because it is intermittent, the electricity collected from renewable sources has to be stored economically and efficiently and then utilized. That is where the battery technologies come, but batteries are also not problem-free. A lot of issues. That's what I will be talking about. In addition to that, for transportation, in the US, about 30% of the energy is used for transportation. So it's a lot of energy. And for that, there are not a lot of options. Batteries are the only viable near-term option. Of course, fuel cells will be better, but the cost is prohibitively high. So at least for the foreseeable future, batteries are going to be the one we have to look for transportation. Now, those of you, there may be a lot of people who may not be very familiar with the battery technology, how it operates. So basically, it will have a negative electrode called anode and a positive electrode called cathode. They are separated by an electrolyte. During charging, we pull out lithium from the cathode. Internally, it goes into the anode while the electron flows through the external circuit. During discharge, exactly the opposite will happen. It's very nice, but we need to consider a few parameters. For example, user time or energy density, how long I can use my cell phone or how long I can drive before I have to charge. Depends upon two parameters. The cell voltage we get times the amount of charge we can store per unit volume or per unit weight in these materials. The voltage is determined by the difference between the redox energies of the cathode and the redox energy of the anode. So that means we have to keep this as low as possible, the anode as high as possible. But there is a constraint. In between the two electrodes, we have the electrolyte that has its own energy levels, highest occupied molecular orbital and the lowest unoccupied molecular orbital. These two redox energies should ideally lie within that band gap. Otherwise, for example, if the cathode is below of the electrolyte, during charging, we will be pulling out electrons from the HOMO of the electrolyte. That means I am oxidizing the electrolyte. The same way, if the LUMO lies below the redox energy of the anode, during charging again, we will be putting the electron into the LUMO of the electrolyte rather than into the anode. The electrolyte is here that should remain or act as a medium to transport charges in this case in the form of lithium ions, between the two electrodes, it should not allow any electron to flow through. So if the conditions are not satisfied, like I said, then you will have electrons going through the electrolytes. That's not good. So what is so big about lithium ion? Why are we so interested in lithium ion? There are a lot of other batteries. For example, lead acid, nickel cadmium, nickel metal hydride. We use a lot of lead acid batteries still in the cars. So what is so big about lithium ion battery? As I said, the energy density or user time is determined by two terms: cell voltage. In the case of other batteries like lead acid or nickel cadmium or nickel metal hydride, we use water-based electrolyte, sulfuric acid or KOH. That means the band gap in the electrolyte is smaller, so it's hard to get more than 2 volt. We can't get more than 2 volt. In the case of lithium ion batteries, we use non-aqueous water-free electrolyte, so this gap is widened, so we can keep cathodes as low as possible energy, as well as anode energy as high as possible. So we are able to get around 4 volt per cell. So voltage is doubled. That's why we get higher energy density with the lithium ion. So the whole world is going for electric vehicle and portable devices with lithium ion batteries. Now, how did it all happen? Professor Stanley Whittingham here, he demonstrated the very first rechargeable lithium batteries at Exxon Corporation here in the United States in 1970 by taking a layered lithium titanium sulfide cathode that will have a layered structure like this and a lithium metal anode. So that is the very first demonstration of the rechargeable lithium batteries. And that had two issues. First, with the sulfide, it is very hard to get more than 2 volt or 2.0 because you can never go below the top of the sulfur 3p band. So it's limited. This is all you can get. Professor Goodenough started his career in the 1950s. He's a physicist, but he worked with a lot of chemistry people over the years, a lot of knowledge on the oxides. So he knew how the energy levels are located and very simple now, but he thought, okay, if that is the problem, I can work with oxides because oxides have their oxygen O2 minus and much lower than the top of the sulfur 3p band. So I can lower the cathode energy from this level to that level. And then analogous to that titanium sulfide, I can also focus on a layered compound like lithium cobalt oxide. So that's where they demonstrated the first cathode material, lithium cobalt oxide as well as lithium nickel oxide. And that had two advantages. One, by doing that, we are suddenly increasing the voltage from less than 2.5 volt to 4 volt, that energy density. Second, the lithium is already available in the cathode. Therefore, we do not have to use a lithium metal anode that creates safety problem. Then Akira Yoshino in Japan, he put together the lithium cobalt oxide and the carbon anode, demonstrated the lithium ion battery concept. And that's why they were given the 2019 Nobel Prize in chemistry. Now it looks simple and we use, but there are at least 6 major parameters we have to consider. How much energy I can store in a given volume or weight, what kind of power density, how fast I can charge, how fast I can discharge, how long I can use it, how many times I can charge, discharge, what kind of safety it is going to have, what are the environmental consequences of the materials that we use, as well as the processes we use. And finally, cost. Cost is not only raw materials, cost is everything. If I make a battery with higher energy density, I can make less number of cells. If it cycles longer, I can use it for longer number of years, say 10 years, 20 years, I do not have to replace, so everything is cost. So with, on top of it, can we have fast charging capability? Can the cell operate, battery operate at lower temperatures as well as higher temperatures? Arizona, you have 105 degrees Fahrenheit today. Can it operate? Will you have problem? Will it fade pretty fast? You can go to Boston in the winter, too cold. Would we have the same kind of performance? So that depends upon the diffusion and other things. So which parameter I pay attention and which battery technology I choose depends upon the application. Portable devices, cell phone, laptop, energy density is the major issue. I don't care about cycle life too much. I can use for 4 years, throw away and get another one. For car, energy density is still important, driving range, but it is also a slightly larger battery, so cost comes into picture. Grid storage, really a large battery, therefore cost is the primary driver, but of course cycle life is important, safety is important, how fast you can charge, discharge is important. All the parameters are important, but cost is the major parameter. Now, those parameters are sensitively controlled by material challenges. So I kind of give quickly here, energy density depends upon the voltage, that depends upon the, to a first approximation on the redox potential, although this is in solution, solids it will be different. Next, how much ion I can store in the form of lithium ion. If it is sodium ion battery, how much sodium ions I can store. How fast you can charge, discharge, depend upon the electronic conductivity of the two electrodes, as well as the ionic conductivity of the two electrodes and the electrolyte. Cycle depends upon the reversibility, how reversibly I can insert, extract lithium, and the stability when you do repeatedly. Thermal stability, are they going to have dendrite problem? Are they going to release oxygen? Is the liquid electrolyte flammable? All those determine that. The environmental impact, as I said, materials as well as processing, and all of them will determine the cost. Now, lithium ion is not the end of the world. There are a lot of batteries, but right now there is nothing to beat lithium ion in terms of energy density. Sodium ions, very appealing because sodium is plenty, cost will be lower, but they will always have a little bit lower energy density than lithium ion. That is similar to, somewhat similar to lithium ion operation. Multivalent ion means working ion instead of lithium or sodium, you have zinc or aluminum. The interest is, if I store one zinc ion, I can store 2 charges. If I store one aluminum ion, I can store 3 charges as opposed to a single charge if I deal with lithium or sodium. So that's the interest. But the penalty is, if you look at their redox energies, redox potentials, you will have lower voltages, and it will be very hard to move these ions, diffuse, for these ions to diffuse through the lattice without overcoming the electrostatic repulsion. So that will limit the reaction kinetics, and also there are not good electrolytes available. So at the end of the day, even though you may be able to store more charges, you may not be able to get much practical energy density with this, at least at the present time. Metal, sulfur, all of these kind of contain metal containing cathode. Here we use sulfur. In principle, you can think of with any of these working ions, but multivalent ion will have still much more serious problems here, like here. Metal air, non-aqueous, mostly fundamental research, very hard to have practical system because the catalyst will also oxidize the electrolyte. But aqueous systems have good potential, at least for grid storage. Redox flow batteries, again, your you can store the active materials, electrode active materials in the form of solution in a tank, so you can store a lot of chemicals in a tank. So that is good for grid storage, but not for portable devices or electric vehicle because the energy density will be lower. All solid state, that is the holy grail of the whole battery technology. That is better for safety in principle. It can give higher energy density, but there are challenges. How are we going to make large area solid electrolyte with the ceramic? Cost, reliability, mechanical integrity, all those are issues. So now, right now, the negative electrode is all mostly graphite. positive electrode, three possibilities: a layered cathode, a spinel cathode, or a polyanion cathode. And all these concepts were developed in the 1980s at the University of Oxford, as well as at the University of Texas at Austin. And as far as the cathodes are concerned, the practical cathodes are concerned, nothing has changed. Still the same thing, same concept. So what all has happened during the past 30, 40 years is more, better and better engineering, but the materials did not change much. Basic materials are still the same. And those cathodes were developed involving 3 visiting scientists from 3 different parts of the country. They were fortunate enough to go to Oxford to work with Professor Goodenough. So first, Mishishima came from Japan, worked with lithium cobalt oxide and lithium nickel oxide, and he left. Michael Thackeray came from South Africa. He worked with spinel. He left. Then after doing my PhD and working in India for some time, I came to Oxford. We started working on the polyanion. Polyanion means here you simply have oxygen, simple oxides. Here the oxygen is bound to something else like molybdenum or tungsten or sulfur or phosphorus or silicon. Those are called polyanions. All of them have iron. When you change this, just the X you are changing, it is just sitting there, it's not doing anything. But first, when you go from iron oxide to iron molybdate, for example, the voltage goes to 3 volt. The same, you replace tungsten, you go to sulfur, sulfate, voltage goes to 3.6 volt. So remember, titanium sulfide less than 2.5 volt. With oxide, we were able to increase it to 4 volt. With a polyanion, when you go from an oxide to a polyanion, we are further able to increase the voltage more than another volt. So that's the beauty. So that's the whole thing, is increasing the voltage at the same time, cutting the cost. You see here, cobalt is expensive, manganese is less expensive, iron is the best you can think of, most abundant and least expensive. Cutting cost, and also these structures, safety increases. Remember, all of these were done in the 1980s. These things were already built in. Very interesting. So we want to know more about this. I was able to write an article last year. It was published in Nature Communications, Open Access Journal. So if you put in Google, yeah, reflection, as it is written here, a reflection on lithium-ion cathode chemistry, you will see that. You can see more about this. Amazingly, that has been accessed. I saw a few days back, 67,000 people have accessed that article. And it is actually good for teaching as well. Now, so what do we do now? Good. So I already talked a little bit about sustainability and cost. So what we are focusing in our group largely is sustainability. That's my title too. So first, the batteries have cobalt, eliminate cobalt. We have successfully eliminated actually last year. Next, eliminate all transition metals. So go to lithium sulfur. Then next, eliminate lithium, cobalt-free sodium-ion batteries, but they will still have metal ion containing cathodes. Finally, eliminate transition metal as well. Then you can think of sodium sulfur or some sodium organic. We are not doing much on sodium organic, excepting on the redox flow we do with this, but for the regular other batteries, sodium sulfur is actually my dream technology if we can solve all the problems. Because both of them are plenty abundant, available everywhere. There is no supply chain issues. So this is what we are focusing in our group. Like I said, this is solved. So we are hanging around here. Let us see how things go as we move forward. So right now, the cathodes we use, they're all composition LiMO2, where M is a mixture of nickel, manganese, cobalt, and nickel, manganese, and cobalt. The question is, why why do we have to use 3 metal ions? Can't we do it with 1? 2 major factors. The first factor is the relative positions of these redox energies with respect to the top of the oxygen 2p band. In the case of cobalt, cobalt 3 plus 4 plus overlaps with the top of the oxygen 2p band. Therefore, if we charge more than 50%, we will pull out electron density from oxide band. That means we are oxidizing oxide ion into superoxide, peroxide, and then finally oxygen will be evolved. So that's why even though lithium cobalt oxide, it will say your laptop 100% charge, it is not 100% charge, it is only 50% charge. If we charge more than 50%, we will have safety problem as well as cycle life problems. Manganese, on the other hand, well above the top of the oxygen 2p, we can go all the way up to manganese 4 plus. There is all kinds of manganese 4 plus oxides, alpha, beta, gamma, delta. So many Greek symbols are running out. So manganese is chemically stable. Cobalt is chemically not that stable. That's what you see here. The next factor is structural stability. These ions are in the octahedral sites in the crystal lattice. So one can calculate the crystal field stabilization energy in the octahedral site and in the tetrahedral site. If we take the difference, and that will tell us to what extent these ions love the octahedral site and hate the tetrahedral site. In the case of cobalt 3 plus, all the 6 electrons are in the low-lying T2G band. Therefore, it has high stabilization for octahedral site. That means cobalt loves octahedral site, it hates tetrahedral site. Manganese, on the other hand, small difference, it can easily migrate from the octahedral site through a neighboring tetrahedral site to this lithium plane. So if it does, 25% migration from here to here will transform the material from layered structure to spinel structure, and the voltage will decrease. So that's a headache car companies cannot handle if the voltage is decaying when you are keep on cycling. Again, the 2 things I mentioned, they were all done long back in my lab through chemical delithiation. And this is what I was talking about here, octahedral site through a neighboring tetrahedral site will fall here because we have pulled out a lot of lithium here. So there is not much positive charge. So these ions will have a tendency to go here, but cobalt does not want to do that because it gets tetrahedral site. Manganese will do that easily. So layer to spinel transition is easy. So structural stability wise, cobalt is the best, manganese is the worst. So it's a gift with the cobalt because structural stability is always important. That's why the commercialization happened in 1990 by Sony with the lithium cobalt oxide. There are other criteria here. I won't have time, but you can see nickel is in between nicely in all of this criteria between manganese and cobalt. That's why everybody is on nickel now. So when you increase nickel, let me go back here. So when you increase nickel, nickel band is barely touching the top of the oxygen 2p. Therefore, you can go all the way to nickel 4 plus. So you can extract more lithium, unlike in the case of cobalt oxide. So you can get higher capacity. That's why everybody is interested. Nickel is way right in the periodic table. Nickel oxygen bond is much more covalent. So rate capability will not be compromised. But there are 3 problems. Cyclability, instability, thermal instability, air instability, that involves the bulk and surface of the cathode as well as the graphite as well, and the interaction among them through the electrolyte. So I want to mention 3 things important here. We have to make the materials in the right way, otherwise it will not be practically relevant. So we can make any particle size from 2 micron to 20 secondary particle size you see here. Normally we use 12 micron, similar to what the industry uses. We can make good material, we can scale up 10 kilogram per batch. That's good. Next, we do our measurements in full cell with graphite anode. So the data are more reliable rather than having too much lithium on the anode side. Third, we also have fantastic analytical capabilities at UT Austin. So we can cycle these materials for thousands of cycles, take the cells out, electrodes out, and analyze to understand what is going on. With that, we have developed a lot of interesting stuff. So I will quickly present some of them. You see here, this material here is 33% nickel. When you go to, say, 90% nickel, capacity is increasing, but cyclability is fading. So that's a challenge. You can increase the energy density, but cyclability will decrease. This is, of course, with lithium metal to show you, but I'm going to hereafter show you all full cells with graphite anode. I'm comparing two materials here, one with 80% nickel, another one with 94% nickel. You see here, as soon as you go to 94%, from 80 to 94, the capacity fades a lot. It's only 14% increase in nickel, but drastic influence on the cyclability. Why? When you go to higher nickel, you obviously extract more lithium. That means you have more phase transformations happening, volume change. So 1500 cycle, if you look at it, the 94% material has more cracks than the other material. The cracks by themselves may not be too much of a problem, but when you have cracks, you create new surface. The surface reacts with the liquid electrolyte to create a lot of unwanted side reactions. So we have done a lot of time of flight secondary ion mass spectrometry, as you see here, with the cycled electrodes. Two cells, one was made with 80% nickel, another one 94% nickel. Everything else is same. Then after 1500 cycles, we take this, open the cell, we analyze the graphite anode. That was same in both cells, but they were paired with different cathodes. We take the graphite anode and analyze. If you see here, when you see the red, we keep on sputtering. When we see the red, we see the graphite anode. Before that, it is all solid electrolyte interface layer. That means the cathode surface reacting with or the anode surface reacting with the liquid electrolyte and building up solid electrolyte interface layer. Here it is, say, maybe 75 nanometer. Here it is, say, 150 or 200 nanometer, meaning this material leads to a thick buildup of the solid electrolyte interface layer on graphite. Remember again, graphite is the same. So there is a crosstalk. The cathode influences the buildup on the anode. We also see more nickel ions migrating from the cathode to the graphite anode in this case, as opposed to that case. So we can understand what is happening. So metal dissolution is a problem that can degrade the cyclability of both the cathode, but largely on the graphite anode as well. Now I talked about second problem is thermal stability. As you see here, when we increase the nickel content from 30% to pure nickel, the thermal stability is decreasing. They release oxygen at a lower temperature. That will lead to safety problems. And that is not linear. It is actually exponential. The third problem is when we make this material and store it, tons of material, that's what the chemical companies have to do. If we keep it in air, they form lithium hydroxide and lithium carbonate on the surface. The green one here is the lithium carbonate and lithium hydroxide on the surface, again with time applied secondary ion mass spectrometry. So when you store it, lithium diffuses from the bulk to the surface to form these, because nickel 3+ is not very stable. We can understand that from very basic chemistry. If you take manganese, we have MnO, Mn3O4, Mn2O3, MnO2. Very stable, no problem. You can have manganese 3+ or manganese 4+, stable in air. Cobalt, you can have up to CO2O3. We do not have COO2. Nickel, you have only NiO, that's it. Not even there is 3+ oxide. And that's why nickel 3+ reacts very rapidly with air. There is something called the surface lithium hydroxide carbonate is called residual lithium. You can do by acid-base titration. Here, the residual lithium is increasing exponentially. Actually, the three problems I mentioned, cyclability, thermal stability, as well as air stability, they all become exponentially challenging when we increase the nickel content, meaning going from 50% nickel to 60% nickel is not same as going from 80% to 85% nickel or 90% nickel or 100% nickel. So that's what we are dealing with. Right now, 60% nickel is commercial, 80% nickel, kind of some users, but some still have difficulties. But the trend is, can I use 90% nickel, 95% nickel, or even 100% nickel? That is the trend. And one of these days it will happen. Now, so, okay, that's all problem. We understand what can we do to overcome the problematic material. You put 2% aluminum in it. Then you see the cyclability and the voltage stability. You can see the 2% aluminum make a big difference. The red curve is with aluminum, green is without aluminum. You can see big improvement in the cycle life. Now let's take the anode, graphite anode paired with this cathode and that cathode, like I talked about in the previous slide, time applied secondary and mass spectrometry. You can see on the graphite anode, you have less nickel if you have 2% aluminum in the cathode, and you have less lithium trapped on the graphite anode if you have 2% aluminum. Now, it's not only aluminum, many things you can dope. I show 3 here. So when we dope with this, they help with all the 3 problems. Cycle life improved, thermal stability improved. After storing in air, the capacity or retention is also improved. This is amazing. In my life, in science, when you do one, when you have a problem, you try to fix it, you will make the other problem worse, or you will create a third problem. And this is where you dope it, all the 3 are getting benefited. You are trying to suppress the challenges with all the 3 problems. Amazing example. I mean, I used to work with superconductivity in the late 80s, copper oxides with Professor Goodenough, postdoc after moving to UT Austin. I know we try to increase the TC, then something else will happen. So now, what is so magic about aluminum or magnesium or other dopants? The structure has Etishad octahedra. This transition metals see each other, even though their energy levels are a little bit different. They can very easily hop, or the electron density is very much delocalized in these oxides. The structure allows that. You see the beauty of the structure. There may be material science students sitting here. Structure, chemical bonding is everything. That determines what we do. Not only battery, all electronic properties, all magnetic properties, all other things we use in the electronics industry, many things are controlled by the structure and the atomic interactions. How do they bond? What kind of electron delocalization or localization we have? All those. As soon as we put aluminum, that acts like a speed breaker. So this electron delocalization is suppressed, a little bit reduced. The lattice becomes more robust. So metal oxygen bond breaking is suppressed. So dissolution is suppressed. So you get better cycle life. Now, would everything dissolve, all metals? No, not everything will dissolve. Only certain ions. So what is the driving force? Whenever you have one electron in the EG band, E orbital, because these ions are in the octahedral site, they will have either static Jahn-Teller distortion or dynamic Jahn-Teller distortion. Nickel has dynamic Jahn-Teller distortion. It has one electron in the EG band. Manganese 3+ has one electron in the EG band. It has static Jahn-Teller distortion. Whenever we have that, they will tend to charge order, and then followed by protonation, followed by disproportionation, and that leads to metal dissolution. Cobalt, all electrons in the T2G band. Cobalt is the most stable and doesn't dissolve. Like manganese, the worst, dissolves more. Nickel is in between. Cobalt is the best in terms of not dissolving. Now, I talked about cobalt. So I compare 4 materials here. All of them have the same nickel content, but some of them have cobalt. Whenever you see here, C here, that means it has cobalt. NMA, that does not have any cobalt. That is this curve. You see here, the capacity retention is as good as or better than some of the cobalt containing material. We are not compromising thermal stability. We are not compromising rate capability. So conclusion, cobalt is not needed in these materials. Without cobalt, these cells, these batteries can be made. Why so big about cobalt? Why are we worried? In the batteries, 50% of the material cost is due to cathode, and in the cathode, cobalt is the most expensive. And right now, it is mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Central Africa, lot of child labor, lot of pollution, and there are a lot of supply chain issues, particularly for us here in the US. So we cannot depend upon cobalt, we have to get rid of them. So this is the first one. To fit into my theme, I talked about sodium ion batteries. They are largely similar to lithium ion, but there is an additional challenge. Lithium prefers generally mostly octaviral site. Sodium prefers both octaviral site as well as trigonal prismatic site. So they have more phase transformations when you charge than lithium ion cathode. So that's another additional factor. Electrolytes are not too much work has been done. Lot happening now, but not to the extent we have done with lithium. So down the road, at least for grid storage and for some low mileage vehicles, they could become potentially practically useful. My last third topic is metal sulfur batteries. No transition metal involved here. The interest here is they have huge capacity, 10 times more than lithium cobalt oxide, because 2 electron transfer, sulfur is also lighter, there is nothing else present there. So you can get huge amount of charge storage capacity with the sulfur, but it doesn't come easily. There are problems. Sulfur is a poor electronic conductor and poor lithium ion conductor. So when you charge, discharge, electron comes, ion comes, they have to diffuse or move through easily. That is a problem. Low utilization. Second, we start with sulfur, that is a S8 ring molecule. When you discharge it, you break one bond, we form Li2S8, Li2S6, Li2S4, then finally Li2S2. This is insoluble in the electrolyte. The end product Li2S is also insoluble in the electrolyte, but the intermediates, the linear ones, they are all soluble in the ether electrolytes we use. So when they are soluble, what they do is they go from here through the porous separator to the anode, messing around cathode as well as anode. That is called polysulfide shuttle. It's going back and forth between the 2 electrodes. Crossover. Problem. More importantly, when you have sulfur, we have to use lithium metal as the anode, and that has its own safety problem and degradation problem. So during the past decade, lot of work is happening all over the world. So many publications, too much is happening. Lot of problems are getting overcome. But one thing is, lot of work is focused on publishing, adding carbon to overcome electronic conductivity. Lot of liquid overcome ionic conductivity, because if we add too much liquid electrolyte, the polysulfide dissolved can diffuse easily, so you can overcome the lithium ion diffusivity in the electrode. But that will pathetically lower the energy density, because you have unwanted carbon, unwanted too much electrolyte. So our goal is here. Are you able to hear me? My internet is okay?
Yes.
Yes. So our goal is to take less than 5% carbon, sulfur loading at least more than 5 milligram per centimeter squared, take less than 5 microliter per milligram, and have better utilization. So this is what we have been focusing. And then testing with coin cells are no good. We have to test with pouch cells. We do a lot of testing with pouch cells so that we can have a little bit better reliable and better measurements. So to understand what is really going on, we have adopted called anode-free full cell. That means, for example, here you take Li2S cathode, like in the lithium-ion battery. On the anode side, you don't take anything, just the current collector, because you have lithium here. Assembled it like the lithium-ion battery. Of course, in lithium-ion battery, you will have graphite here. Here, there is nothing there excepting current collector. So this will eliminate all the hurdles. Handling lithium metal foil is not easy either. How are we going to make thin metal foil, lithium foil? How are we going to handle all those are problems? We eliminate that. Maximizes the energy density because you do not have to have free lithium. And as assembled cells will not have any self-discharge. And then finally, we have to do some molecular engineering with the polysulfides to overcome the lithium metal stabilization. So with this, we have made a lot of understanding and we are trying to use that to make the lithium sulfur work better. As you can see here, without controlling the stabilization of lithium metal, you have faster decay, but if you stabilize the lithium metal anode, you can get better cyclability. So let me have a couple of more slides to do this. So what really causes the lithium metal to degrade in lithium sulfur batteries? So this is the same anode cell I was talking about with the nickel current collector on the anode, 5 cycles, 40 cycles, 300 cycles. We have done a lot of XPS as well as time applied secondary and mass spectrometry. As you see here, anything which moves from the this is the analysis on the lithium metal anode. Obviously, polysulfide has moved, diffused, crossed over from the cathode to the anode. So it forms some sulfide species. That's okay. But what we see is we also see these sulfur oxygen containing species oxidized. Lithium sulfur battery needs a little bit of lithium nitrate. So lithium nitrate along with the salt causes an oxidation of the sulfide species to these oxygen containing species, and that keeps, you see here, oxygen containing species increasing. By the time you go to 300 cycle, all the sulfide species is transformed or oxidized to these oxygen containing sulfate or sulfide species. That is insulating and that kills lithium metal cyclability. This is similar analysis with time applied secondary and mass spectrometry. All these oxygen containing sulfur species completely formed compared to here initially on the surface, but it goes deeper, thicker everywhere. So that is the problem. So what do we do? So if you look at the periodic table, you have selenium below sulfur and below that tellurium, but tellurium is not a non-metal. Selenium resembles more closely to sulfur than tellurium, but they can all have 6+ valence as well as 2- valence. So if you add 10% tellurium to the sulfur cathode, you can see without tellurium, this oxidation of sulfide species to sulfur is too much. Everything is gone here, 300 cycles. But if you do this, then you can reduce it, you can suppress it. Also, you get better morphology of the lithium on the plated lithium. You will get better, smoother morphology than without having tellurium. So this is without having tellurium, cyclability falls. As soon as you put tellurium, you can turn it around. I have data, but because of time constraint, I did not put everything here. But the main conclusion is this. So what does really tellurium do? So when you add tellurium, it substitutes into the polysulfide, Li2 S6, for example. In that, part of the sulfur is replaced by tellurium because they are in the same group. Once it does it, it forms something called Li2TeS3. Excuse me. Li2TeS3. So this forms on the lithium metal anode as a robust in situ formed SCA on the lithium metal anode, and that helps to keep better cyclability. or better stability or better plating and stripping efficiency with the lithium metal. That is what is happening. So that improves the cycle life as well as the lithium deposition morphology and other things. My final thing is I won't be able to present everything here because the paper is getting in the process of getting reviewed. So sodium sulfur cell, that is the best we can think of. When you go from lithium sulfur to sodium sulfur, the challenges are too huge. There is not too much work going on in sulfur because of those challenges. So by working with the electrolyte as well as the electrodes, we are able to kind of change the landscape. So this is one of the best data. I don't think anybody has this kind of cyclability in the literature. So I think there is a lot of hope as we move forward. Slowly transitions will happen, eliminate cobalt, eliminate at some point, or not eliminate, maybe reduce the use of lithium ion batteries, maybe replace some of them with sodium ion batteries. Then having, instead of transition metal containing compounds, can we use sulfur both in lithium and sodium? That's what I think the future may go, or there will be other technologies developed as well with organics and other things. So this is the landscape. So right now we are at approximately 200 watt-hour per kilogram. If we have the nickel content increase, that could go to 300 watt-hour per kilogram with graphite anode. If we have high nickel cathode and lithium metal anode, then we could go up to 400 watt-hour per kilogram. And if we replace the the high nickel cathode with the sulfur, and if you solve all the problems by taking little electrolyte, not too much, then there is potentially we can go up to 500 watt-hour per kilogram. And that is what is the battery 500 consortium, Department of Energy funding. PNNL is the lead institution. I am part of that. So there we focus on lithium metal anode. For the cathode, we focus both on high nickel cathode as well as sulfur cathode. So that's the phase 1 is getting done next month. Phase 2, we have submitted the proposal. We are waiting for that. So that's a good program involving a lot of good people focusing on. The goal is to get 500 watt-hour per kilogram. That is double of what we have now. If the problem slowly, we have to solve them and come to that. Sodium ion, like I said, it will be little bit less than lithium ion with the same kind of cathodes. Sodium sulfur, again, it can go 400 to 450 maybe. All solid states, they are the best in terms of safety. They can also, in principle, increase the energy density, but it is very hard to say now, not a lot of data. It's all research, so only time will say, because the stability or mechanical integrity and large scale manufacturing, all those are issues. So this is my current group. I think the new students have come. I have to update it. Anyway, I'm very grateful to all the people who have worked with me over the years, about 270 people, including the graduation of 66 PhD students. And they are all over the world as faculty members, are working in large industries, including 2 vice presidents at LGChem and a lot of faculty members here, as well as in Korea, China, India. I'm very grateful to all of them for doing all the wonderful work. And more importantly, the funding agencies, Department of Energy heavily funded for the years, as well as industry like Samsung and Tesla and other companies. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Manthiram. That was a great talk. And yeah, I certainly learned something about lithium-ion batteries. So we have asked our students to post questions in this chat box, and also some of the faculty members are. So we are just going to be starting with the first question. So Meng, can you unmute yourself and ask the question? Meng, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, great talk and very encouraging. One question is that you talk about this. I see the justification for this sodium. That's the ultimate goal. But seems to me that the batteries for transportation are electric vehicles versus the batteries are for energy storage, for solar or for wind. Those are like two different sets of requirements. So do you see this sodium sulfur battery being used in both applications, or more suitable for one application?
Okay, if you remember my yearly slide where I said energy, power, cycle life, and other things. So the chemistry, there are three broad applications: portable devices, electric vehicle, and then grid storage, right?
Yeah.
They all have different requirement, or we focus on different parameters heavily. Of course, for cell phone, laptop, the current technology we use, there is not much to beat them unless we reduce the carbon amount and we electrolyte amount and we make all the sulfur utilizable, then potentially, but I don't think it's easier. So when we say lithium sulfur, if the problems are solved, it's getting better and better. Of course, it's not like a lot of progress has been made in the past decade and continuously improving. If you solve those problems, certainly for grid storage or electric vehicle here in the US, we want to go like 500 miles at a stretch or something before we have to recharge. But there are a lot of other countries, even here, people drive every day, go to work. So it is possible. It is not necessary that we have to have the highest driving range in every vehicle. At the end of the day, it comes to cost. If a battery stores a little bit energy density, if it lasts longer and cost is lower, people may prefer that. Now I can tell you, you might have seen Tesla, right? They are using NCA and then higher and higher nickel content they are trying to use, but they are already using LiFePO4 in China for some one model, right? So it depends upon which country you are talking about, even in the US, where, who. So we cannot just sit with the technology we are currently using because there will be a lot of challenges. If you talk to any big industry, their biggest concern is cost. I know, I work with industry. I don't want to say who is telling me. So cost is their primary concern. How are we going to be dominating? How are we going to dominate the industry by lowering the cost? So that is the primary driver. So you answer your question, do I have a lithium sulfur battery that can be right away used? No, we don't. But the lithium cobalt oxide, graphite, they were all known in 1980s, and we are still learning 40 years later. Amazing. We are still learning. We are still learning. Pure nickel oxide, what can we do 40 years later? There are a lot of clever people, wonderful young people as well, all over the world. So we have to be optimistic. And I think something will happen.
Just one related question. A very quick question. Sulfur has like a 10 to minus 512 vapor pressure at a room temperature. So in this case, do you need to expect your ceiling for your sodium sulfur-based battery in this case, or it works? It's a chemical compound, so it does not have that vapor pressure.
So you mean the electrode or the electrolyte you are talking about?
No, sulfur as a solid has a vapor pressure. So once you put it into the electrode, I'm not sure whether it still has a.
No. Once you put into the electrode, into the cell, you have solid sulfur, it is remaining as solid. Unless if it catches fire, the temperature goes up, then you will have all kinds of problems. So that is not the concern, no. Lithium metal dendrite formation, that is the concern, right? So
Thank you.
Sodium metal, low temperature. Yes, melting point lower, that is a concern, correct. But there are a lot of engineering, you can have safety, even in the current batteries we use, your battery will not be charged more than, your charger will not allow to charge more than 50%, right? So they can do all these to cut when the temperature goes up or something, that's all engineering people can do, just shut it down. It won't work. So, I mean, it is becoming complicated. Yes, it will be nicer if you go to higher temperature, nothing happens. But I think there are ways people can overcome that, not with the engineering.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Aaron.
All right, thank you. So the next question is from an external participant from the University of Alabama. So Sakibul, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Hello, Dr. Monthiram. Thank you for your excellent talk. So you have done some amazing job with lithium sulfur batteries, but when you move from lithium sulfur battery to aluminum sulfur battery, in aluminum sulfur battery, you used ionic liquid electrolytes, right? So what kind of electrolytes are you going to use for sodium sulfur batteries?
I mentioned that one slide, I cannot talk about it now, that's why I said. So I cannot talk about, I'm sorry, I cannot talk about that now.
Okay, yeah, I understand, thank you.
But the regular electrolyte, it's harder, it won't work. I won't say it won't work, it's difficult. It's not like it works with the lithium, do the same thing with sodium sulfur, it's very challenging to make it work.
And
you will know after some months.
okay, sure, hopefully. So my second question, yes, sir, thank you. So my second question is, what is your expectation with solid state based lithium sulfur batteries?
Oh, solid state already getting, very challenging with the highly ionic and electronically conducting lithium cobalt oxide. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You do not have electronic conductivity problem. You do not have ionic conductivity problem with the lithium cobalt oxide. When you go to sulfur, it's all solid. How are you going to have lithium ion diffusion? It's very challenging. Unless you put something with sulfur, good ionic conductor, lot of amount, then ion is transported as well as electronics transported, it can work, but it will be extremely difficult to have all solid state having high sulfur content, not having other content inside. You can imagine, right? That's what I mentioned earlier, that the reason the lithium sulfur with the liquid electrolyte works is it forms polysulfide. So solution, so things are moving, lithium is moving, it works great, but it also goes to the other side. So that's the problem. So all solid state very, very challenging. I won't say, I will never say impossible, but very difficult.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
I'm talking about practical application having practically relevant charge discharge rates and cycle life and things like that.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So the next question is from my department colleague, Professor Candace Chan. So Candace, please go ahead.
Hi, Candace. How are you?
Good. Very nice talk. The high nickel contact work is really interesting and really impressive. So especially the cracking of the particles with the volume change. So some of the tricks that have been used for other high volume change materials like the silicon anodes, can you also do that with these particles? Is there a particle size effect?
Silicon, you have a lot of volume change, right? Like 200, 300, 400%, depending upon how much lithium you put. Here, it is not that kind of magnitude. In my opinion, honestly, I didn't present anything. There are people who attribute the high nickel completely to the crack. It is not, actually crack is not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is high nickel surface reacting with the liquid electrolyte, and then things are getting dissolved. That is the major problem, because nickel 3+ and nickel 4+ is not stable in contact with the liquid electrolyte. That is the biggest problem. Of course, when you have crack, that creates a little bit more surface, new surfaces. It will magnify. But what is really need to be done is we have to have an electrolyte that does not cause the surface reactivity or has lower surface reactivity, or protect the cathode surface by coating with something so that the nickel 3+, 4+ is not in direct contact with liquid electrolyte. If you do that, I think the problem with the crack we are getting is very minimal, in my opinion.
Okay, so that's a little bit related to my second question. If you think surface coatings versus bulk doping of dopants is more effective, but it seems like you think both are probably needed.
Both are needed, but if you have a good surface coating, doping you can do while you are synthesizing, cooking the material. It's not going to cost additional money, right? If you can do some good coating robust, so that when you keep on cycling, the coating should not break, right? Conformal, uniform, thin coating, can you get it? That's what we need.
Okay.
That's what we need. If it is the crack problem also, it is not just the material causing the crack problem alone. When the surface reacts, you have rock salt phase. You are familiar with all these. You have spinel phase, spinel-like phase on the surface, rock salt phase on the surface. So when they do that, the material will lose oxygen because nickel 3 plus 4 plus goes to NiO, 2 plus oxide, right? Then that slowly goes inside the 10 nanometer, 15 nanometer, 20 nanometer. When it goes there, that itself can also make the material to crack because loose ends are formed, some bond is broken, some things are dissolving, then cracks will happen. See, I can physically feel it, right? So if you have the surface grade not allowing all these spinel or rock salt phase formed, even the crack tendency may be reduced.
Okay, thank you.
We are working on it, by the way, but I don't have a lot of data. So we will see.
Okay, we look forward to that. Thank you.
I have a lot of good people working in my group. Wonderful to work with them. So we will see.
All right. Yeah, thank you. So the next question is from one of our students in the MSc program. Igor, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for getting to my question. Though actually, I think you answered most of it when talking to Dr. Chan, finding a compatible electrolyte. But I'm still interested in the idea of cracking. My first question basically is, does the cracking worsen electrical conductivity in the battery? And second, when finding a coating or an electrolyte, what should one consider when looking for minimizing the losses going from the interface from particle to coating to electrolyte?
So when the crack happens, the interparticle contact will break, so material can become isolated, right? That's why everybody, our large attention is focused on crack. But before crack takes time, it doesn't form in the first few cycles or something. You have to do large number of cycles, then the crack becomes more and more. So to answer your first question, yes, cracks can isolate particles, then that will reduce the utilization, so capacity will go down. What is the second part of the question again? I'm sorry.
I was wondering then what the train of thought would be. You said either find a better electrolyte that doesn't attack the particles or find a coating. As I'm unfamiliar, how feasible would it be to find a coating that doesn't worsen conductivity?
Okay, so finding an electrolyte, you have solvent, you have salt. I mean, that may be when you go to with nickel, it will be challenging too. So, but you can have some additives, for example. If you have an additive in the electrolyte in the beginning, if that forms a very nice conformal coating on the, I don't know how to do it. I'm just telling, if it forms a conformal coating on the cathode particle, then the cathode surface may not be attacked to that much. Or electrolyte solvent can be changed completely, new kind of solvents may be synthesized, it's possible. The other possibility is conformal thin coating. How do we get it? We try to coat aluminum oxide or aluminum phosphate or something else. We try to do chemical coating. That will not be uniform. Some places will be open, some places will be thick. That is not going to make it for large number of cycles. So it's an issue of, we need probably both, but if you do one very well, if you have a very robust surface, then I think if your electrolyte, regular electrolyte can work. As long as you don't expose nickel 3 plus 4 plus to the liquid electrolyte, it should work. But how do we get that coating robust? Also, like Candace asked earlier, if there are volume changes, then this crack, the coating can open too, right? So you need something really bonds well, it doesn't get open, at least for 1,000 cycles. That's what we need. It's not easy, right? That's why everybody is struggling. We know what we need, but how do we get it?
Yeah, and sorry, that question was broad, but thank you for answering it in such detail.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So the next question is from Shranjit Day. He's also my departmental colleague. So Shanzip, can you unmute yourself and ask the question? You're still around, Shanzip? Okay, so I think he's not there. So let me read his question. So it's also on the chat box. Can lithium ion?
Ankit, he wants you to read his question because he has problems with this microphone.
Okay, yeah. So can lithium ion and accepted dopant go into the nickel site upon insertion? If so, is there a possibility of forming holes under high oxygen partial pressure during processing or operation, or oxygen vacancies under low oxygen partial pressure? Which is preferable? How will the battery properties and reliability be affected in such scenarios?
So when you go to high nickel content, let us take lithium nickel oxide. Lithium nickel oxide is known as a cathode in the 1980s, like I said earlier. It's not new now. The problem is when you synthesize, nickel 3 plus will not be stable. So nickel 3 plus will tend to reduce to nickel 2 plus. At 700, 800 degrees C, it will tend to reduce to nickel 2 plus. When it gets reduced, lithium will volatilize. So that's why when we have high nickel cooking now, when you synthesize high nickel materials, we need high oxygen flow. Also, the temperature has to be as low as possible. But you cannot lower the temperature too much. If you lower, then diffusion becomes a problem. And many times, the synthesis temperature can become very sensitive within plus minus 10, 20 degrees. With lithium cobalt oxide, that's not the case. You throw in the furnace, 750 degrees to 900 degrees C, go home, come back tomorrow, best material, just use it. So you need high oxygen flow to keep all the nickel as nickel 3 plus as much as possible. So if you don't have good oxygen flow, there will be oxygen vacancies and lithium will go out, nickel will be 2 plus. And if you have, even if you have high oxygen flow, there will be always a little bit of oxygen vacancies. So one can do a titration, redox titration, and find that out. I don't know whether I completely answered or not. Is there another part missing?
Shanzip, can you type in your response?
So maybe Krishna can read the later part because it was a long question.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
No, Dr. Mandiram. I think that was his question, and I don't see any more from him.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So let's move on to the next one. So the next one is from your from one of your past workers. I think Professor Kannan has asked a question. He did not log in. I think he is using someone else's login. So Professor Kannan, if you're there, you can ask the question, or I can read it. Okay, maybe I'll just go ahead and read it. So when do you think the 500 WH per kilogram lithium ion batteries be realizable for automotive applications for handling range anxiety?
So you can see the publications coming out of the Battery 500 consortium. Continuous progress is being made. 400 watt-hour per kilogram already there. So when we do not have it in hand, it's very hard to say when it will be. But all I can say is confidently, it's a pretty good team and it is working extremely well. And it is continuously, there is a competition between energy density and cycle life, right? So that's what we are focusing. How do we increase both? So at some point, it will become possible. I cannot tell you when. If it is already possible, we do not have a phase 2.
All right. So
but continuously increasing, we are already 400 watt-hour per kilogram, or a little over. Those two cells are made at the PNNL.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So maybe we have time for one or two more questions. So one question is from Zach. So Zach Luty, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Hello, thank you for the wonderful talk. And my question was regarding the current state of the art on battery recycling for these like high nickel content batteries, and what kind of elements are extracted. You know, surely maybe the nickel is worth extracting and recycling. And I was curious about, is lithium something that's commonly extracted and recycled, or is it difficult for some reason to extract, and what other materials are viable and yeah.
So that is a very good question. As we move forward, more and more batteries are going to be used. So as long as we use the lithium-ion technology with these kind of oxide cathodes, recycling is essential, because too many batteries are going to be used all over the world. We cannot do business without recycling. So when we recycle, we have to extract cobalt, nickel, manganese, lithium, everything, I would say, cost effectively. How do we do it without spending a lot of money? So that's happening some, but not to the extent. But when the battery cost is going up because of these problems, there will be lots and lots of activity. So recycling is essential.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So we have another question from Harish. So Harish, so maybe this is our last question, and we can wrap it up after this. So Harish, can you ask your question, please?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Mantiram, for an excellent talk. I just wondered, when you make the cathode material itself, can you think of adding some additive while preparing the cathode, which sort of mitigates the problem of crack formation, propagation, and growth? Much along the lines of ceramic materials, where people think of adding zirconia to tough ceramics to minimize crack propagation and growth in them.
So when you dope, generally the doping is done to go into the lattice. When they go into the lattice, depending upon what you have doped, some of them suppress the crack formation. Some of them try to dope, they go into the bulk, and they will also be on the surface, right? So
correct.
Structural, what you are telling me is the structural ceramic. So that correct. Kind of things not happening too much here, because you cannot add any extra things which are not active, because energy density is very critical, right? You don't want to put a lot of heavy or stuff that you will decrease the active material content.
Correct,
the whole reason we are interested in nickel is to increase the energy density, right? And if you add something to suppress crack with a lot of doping or adding something, then if that brings down the energy density, then it defeats the purpose, right? So that's what.
Okay. So, but have there been any efforts in that direction, or this is a direction?
No, generally, yeah, doping, lot of efforts. Doping changes to some extent crack formation. If it doesn't suppress completely, the more lithium you extract, the more cracks you will have. You can always stop less at a particular capacity, then you can minimize the crack. So it is a competition between how much capacity I'm trying to get out of the material versus crack. The more capacity you try to get, the more cracks will happen, because in one of the slides I showed the volume change happens towards the end. Okay, let me see.
Ankit, if I may ask a very quick question. What is Professor Mandiram, what is the state of the art on mixed ion batteries like lithium, sodium, or
mixed ion sodium and lithium together?
Yeah.
That's possible, but the electrolyte, how do they work, and what is the benefit we get? Maybe with sodium ion, yes. If you have some mixed lithium ion, there are some work like that. Sodium-based material, but they have some lithium, so lithium will be the active ion.
Yeah.
Let me see here.
Okay.
So that's possible, but you have to see what benefit we get, right? So.
Okay, but is that I assume is largely unexplored territory?
There are some publications I've seen. but
Okay.
largely academic, not from practical point
Not
of view. I think
practical.
there may be issues because you are using electrolyte, you will put a particular salt, then there will be a lot of exchange from the material to the liquid, or so that's another whole
Okay.
thing. So at the end of the day, we have to look what problem it is solving and what is the benefit we are getting. We put a lot of different things.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. So I think we need to wrap it up because it's already 12:15 here. So Professor Manthiram, we are really glad to have you here today. And then it was a very nice talk. Thank you for your time. And after this, you'll
Thank
be having 2 more meetings, of course. So you'll be meeting some of our colleagues, Krishna also, I think, and at UFA. So thank you again. And hopefully we'll meet at the conference. Thank you so much.